I still remember that morning like it happened yesterday, even though it was quite a few years ago already. I was by calm and misty Trillium Lake with the beautiful manhood as the backdrop. It was the perfect place to be for sunrise. Luna was there too, and she enjoyed it very much, but for different reasons. She was not paying much attention to the landscape. Anyway, I remember the beauty of the landscape and the beauty of the atmosphere, but I also remember what the only other photographer there asked me. What's your aperture? I didn't know what to say because, you see, when I take photos, I usually have no idea what my settings are. And maybe they didn't either. Perhaps they were just trying to have a conversation and that was their way to break the ice. But there is a certain tendency in photography to put the emphasis on camera settings, even in situations when they don't even matter, which, by the way, it's most of the time. That's why I don't really know what to make of a photograph with the settings next to it, because photography is not a recipe. Those values tell me very little about the photograph. What do you see when I tell you f1.4, 1/40th of a second, ISO 1250? What about f1.4, 1/40th of a second, but ISO 200? Or what about f1.4, 1/3200th of a second, ISO 100? Those were the settings I used, or should I say the camera used, to make these three images. They were made with very similar settings from the exact same spot, and still, they are so different from each other. Again, photography is not a recipe, and the settings are not the ingredients. I guess the main reason why I don't like talking about camera settings is because they make photography sound like it's an exact science, when it's not at all. It's quite the opposite. The settings are not a formula that we can use to make images like the ones we like from other photographers. In fact, camera settings can be counterproductive because they might make us focus on the wrong things. They also make photography, or they aspire to make photography feel safe, certain, leaving no room for experimentation or accidents. Now, I'm not saying that settings don't matter at all, but they can get in the way. We worry too much before pressing the shutter. There are so many things to think about. Is everything in focus? Is this shutter speed enough to freeze the action? Is this ISO going to add too much noise? We overthink the process, and in the meanwhile, we don't even know what we are trying to capture or why. We pay more attention to the camera than to what's in front of us. Or even worse, the scene just fades away, gone forever, tired of waiting for us because we took too long. We forget about what really matters, what we are trying to capture, why. If anything, when we are taking pictures, we should shut off our brain and shoot from the gut, from the heart instead, letting what we feel guide us. When we make photography simple, when we let ourselves play with the medium, we get rewarded. If there's something that we should think a little bit about when we're shooting, is the composition. Is this the right angle for the subject? Does it portray what I want to show about them? Is the background clean enough, or does it add enough context? What about the edges of the frame? When you're shooting, keep moving, keep trying different angles, and press the shutter whenever it feels right. It is very important to not worry about making good images. We have to let ourselves take bad photographs. They're not failures. We learn from every shot we take. We learn about photography, about the subject, about our camera, about ourselves. I once read that photography is not about taking good pictures, but about not showing the bad ones. I can agree with that. Perhaps even bad is not the right word. Perhaps there are no bad photos, just not as meaningful photos, images that don't speak to us. So we have to experiment more. We have to play with the elements that do matter: the light, the weather conditions, the time of the year, the time of the day. When we think of photography in terms of camera settings, we are narrowing the type of images we are going to make. We limit our otherwise limitless possibilities. We become serious photographers, which in photography as an art is not necessarily a good thing. That's why I love using an automatic mode on my digital camera, because this way I can focus on what really matters. And yes, sometimes the settings are not the right ones for the scene I'm photographing, and I might end up taking photographs I would have never taken otherwise if I was in total control of the settings. I have an example here because this image always comes to mind when I talk about this, and it's this one of a frozen Multnomah Falls. Somehow the camera chose a very slow shutter speed, and I took this unintentional ICM photograph. It still is my favorite from that day. Or this one that I took from inside the car just a few days ago from here, from this spot. It was a rainy day and the water drops on the window of the car created this absolutely imperfect photo that I absolutely love. As you can see, only the branch in the very middle is in focus. What were the settings? I don't know, who cares? What matters is that I believe that image captures the essence of that moment, a beautiful landscape, but a rainy and windy day when it was hard to even look at the fjord for more than a few seconds. You could only get a glimpse before the wind and the rain started getting in your eyes. And I think this image conveys that feeling much better than a perfect image with the perfect settings could ever have. Again, I'm not saying that shooting at f1.4 is the same as shooting at f11, because it's not. But the specific aperture of a specific photograph tells us very little, because we don't know the distance to the subject, to the foreground, to the background. In the same way, shutter speed matters too sometimes, but knowing the shutter speed used in a photo tells us very little, because we don't know how fast the subject was moving. Even in long exposures, that's the kind of photography that I love doing, we don't know how fast the clouds were moving or how choppy the water was. I'm always changing the exposure time in my long exposures based on all of those factors. If you don't have that information, just the settings are pretty much useless. So instead of on settings, we'd be better off by focusing on what we want to achieve and why, on the composition that will capture the essence of the scene. A tack-sharp dual image will feel even duller. An imperfect but full of meaning and emotion photograph will always work. My advice is to pay less attention to the dials on the camera and pay more attention to the landscapes, to the subject, whatever we have in front of us. All right, that's all. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next one.